All right. Welcome back to the archive, John. It was a lot of fun having you before, and it was a lot of fun talking to you on the Skaldic archive. And today, since last time you told me that you were going to teach me how to make a cup of British tea, I went down to Salem. I went to the Nautical Visitor Center, and I got this supposed to be historically accurate or close to it as possible black tea brick. Which all contributions do go to National Forestry Center, which is a very important thing here in the States. So the unveiling with our first returner.
Brick of tea.
Yes,
this is new to me.
Yeah, gonna make sure that you live up to your word and teach me how to make proper cup of British tea. Yeah, I love all these designs. It's really cool stuff. All right, so I'm gonna crack the tea, and
oh, Bobby, that's a strong brick of tea.
May have just fractured my kneecap trying to do that.
That's not a great start to a cup of tea. You want to be relaxed and.
Yes. I know tea time's supposed to be fun. You're not supposed to be breaking anything. I didn't know that I was going to be like I'd be needing a hammer. I thought this content would be a lot softer.
Yes, that's very. I don't know how much tea you get then in a measure. That's if you're breaking off a chunk, I don't know how you decide that's enough or not.
Well, we'll find out today.
It's quite aggressive.
All right. Well, we'll edit it. We'll edit this. Or who knows? Maybe I'll just keep it all in here and people
do a YouTube short of this. It'll be a masterpiece. You stabbing a knife upside of this.
Stabbing a knife. I need like a sledgehammer just to crack this thing open. God. Maybe if I got a siphon. Maybe if I kept it under something, all the tea dust that's now underneath my desk, I could have collected and used. Put this in the bowl, drop it in.
You got a strainer, a tea strainer or something like that too.
Yeah, I do got a tea strainer right here, the small metal one. Okay. All right, John. So while I am
breaking your other kneecap,
cup of tea, which has been nothing more than.
Have you boiled the water in the kettle?
Did.
Okay, good.
It's still boiling hot, so.
Excellent. You didn't use a microwave because that is considered the ultimate sin. And actually, Britain almost declared war on America when someone, I think, put that on YouTube or something how to make a British cup of tea, and they put the cup in a microwave. And it was on the news in Britain, like literally all over the news. The sacrilege of it.
Sacrilege of tea. Yeah, no, that's the thing. You got to boil things. Mm-hmm. I don't know the scientific difference between boiling and microwaving, but I know that things will never taste as good. It always comes out too moist or...
Yeah, I think there's an issue in America because America uses a lot of 120 or 110 volt. Kettles aren't as effective. They take a lot longer in America than the UK to work, which is why that you don't tend to get, or you get special kettles now that they'll boil more efficiently, I think.
Yeah. All right. So today, aside from forcing you against your will to teach me how to make a proper cup of British tea, I do want to talk quickly about Atlantis. You did a little video on it, and there's a lot of skepticism, and I feel like the whole archaeological and historical community is now at war with Graham Hancock over over his show now, Ancient Apocalypse.
Yes, and it's quite disappointing as well, the sort of the feedback. So we'll just summarize the Graham Hancock thing. Let's call it the Graham Hancock thing. So Graham is a journalist. Okay, he's not an archaeologist, he's not a scientist, he's not an anthropologist, he's not a qualified historian. He is a journalist. And so, and he states this in his later interviews to make sure that people don't challenge him academically. I think that is the reason. And so he's made these claims about how he perceives certain aspects of civilization to have been created. That's fine. But I think what annoys many academics is he's just completely wrong, but he's getting a lot of publicity about it because he tells a great story about it. He's a great storyteller. He gets some facts and he glues these facts together with some myths, and so they feel right to a layman who doesn't understand the science, the academia behind it. And then what seems to be more frustrating is that there are others within the circle, like Russell Brand, quite recently had an interview with Graham a few days ago, well, as we recalled this, saying, "Oh, it's really must be really horrible how a lot of people have called you a white supremacist, Graham," because basically the view is that if Graham says an ancient civilization built the pyramids and it wasn't the Egyptians, that sort of, in effect, is taken away from Egyptian culture, their ability to build the pyramids. They're giving it to someone else, and that's so. There's probably a 1% of 1% have suggested Graham's doing that. Many people are just saying, no, Graham, that's ignorant and you shouldn't take away a culture's ability to do something. But you get people like Russell Brand who takes this, the cream of the cream, and then makes it a mainstay issue and sells it like that. So to me, it's a real disappointing, I don't know, publicity effort from Graham and Russell to get lots of views, get lots of revenue and promote something that's wrong, but that lots of people find entertaining. And that's frustrating from an academic point of view. And I think that's the reason why there's been a lot of pushback from the academic community, is that it's frustrating that naysayers, get that. I mean, if we were talking about other things, Facebook would block them and YouTube would block them for misinforming. And we had all this stuff with COVID and the like. So, but you're not getting that with Graham Hancock's view. And that's, again, frustrating. And then, so Graham said, okay, academics, give me someone to argue with. And a few academics put their names forward. And then Graham chose the academic he would talk with or discuss with his views, rather than the academic community giving someone to fight. So we feel that's a bit, he could be a bit biased in there. And apparently he's going to go on Joe Rogan towards the latter half of this year to have a discussion with the academic about his show and his theories. So that's where we are, but that's why there's a lot of frustration. And of course, one of the things he talks about is Atlantis and how he believes Atlantis was real and home to an ancient civilization that influenced the whole world. Right. Now, there's two ways we can approach this. I can go through the academic view of why this isn't the case, or I can just give you one little fact that will prove it isn't the case. So
I think I'm interested in both.
Okay, so the little fact is that this advanced civilization who built the pyramids, who survived this flood, the worldwide flood catastrophe, which wasn't quite as bad as he says, who built the pyramids and all that, who were advanced, hadn't invented the wheel. Okay, so this is an advanced civilization that hadn't invented the wheel, because there was no wheels in Egypt at the time the pyramids were built. And the wheel came with the Indo-Europeans. And the potter's wheel was probably going. So how can a civilization be advanced if they haven't even invented a wheel? To me, that seems like very basic. But there's many more things to talk about. But let's just go into the story of why he thinks Atlantis is real. Okay, which is basically he's saying that Plato writes about Atlantis. He's our first author about Atlantis, and he writes about this in the sort of 4th century, the early part of the 4th century BCE. So about 2,500 years ago, 2,400 years ago. And he said that Solon, who I believe is like his grandfather, maybe, or that sort of level, a few, like 150 years before him, went to Egypt and was told by priests that some writing on a wall was the story of Atlantis and how it was flooded 9,000 years earlier, and those people dispersed. Now, therefore, Graham Hancock has said, the Atlantis flooding ties in exactly with the like end of the Younger Dryas event and some flooding, so what we call some pulse water, where there's a big lake in North America, like the continent North America, that released its water into the Atlantic Ocean, and we know that happened, and it's saying that caused the in effect, the destruction of Atlantis, and that civilization there spread across, I guess, Eurasia and into Northern Africa to spread their advanced knowledge and build the pyramids and the like. So why we think this isn't the case is multiple reasons. First, the flood that he's saying happened, the pulse water, as part of the Younger Dryas, that probably raised sea levels at a rate, perhaps a maximum rate of about 1 meter a year. Okay, so if you think about that, that is probably a couple of millimeters a day. So I'm asking you, if you're an advanced civilization, if your sea on your shore was rising at 2 millimeters a day, would it wipe out everybody? Or would people have time to say, oh, the sea level's rising, we can all escape to safety and rebuild Atlantis elsewhere? And bearing in mind, this is over the course of probably hundreds of years, this slowly rose. So that seems a bit odd that he's saying there's so much destruction. Now, we know the sea levels have risen, and we know there are many communities on the edge of the sea, and we know many of those communities were lost, but it wasn't lost in the destructive kind of way he suggests. And we know this because we found many of these places, and they're reasonably intact. It isn't like some big tsunamis come along and sort of literally wiped all the buildings away. Okay, so that's one. Two, Solon going to a temple to see this writing. This temple's disappeared, which is lucky for Graham. So no one can prove he went to the temple to do that. The only proof we got he went there from Solon is he said, "Oh, I went to Egypt and went to a temple." But he did. It was Plato who actually says what happened there. And then who kept a story for 9,000 years to then tell the Egyptians to write it on the wall of that temple when we don't find that story anywhere else? It seems very odd that one set of people in that one place in Egypt managed to keep that one story going for 9,000 years and then totally forgot about it again and didn't tell anyone. Because that myth hasn't continued, apart from through Plato. It hasn't continued in Egypt, hasn't been around Egypt, just isn't there. And then, I say, when Plato talks about it, he's again, the way he talks about it, everybody believes it's really like an analogy to say that actually Greece used to be as good as Egypt, because Egypt was seen as a really impressive culture. And Greece at that time was not so impressive. And so we believe actually what Plato's describing Atlantis is how he would perceive Greece as being a greater place hundreds of years before. And he's just trying to create that analogy in a story. So that is really my take on Atlantis and Hancock's view. And there's some really basic key information that is very doubtful on how Hancock tells the story.
Okay. Yeah. Because there's a lot, for me, like I've been hearing about Atlantis forever, and I'm always interested to learn about possibly like where a myth could have came from, because in the Mediterranean, I can't remember what the name of it was. I think it started with a K, and it was wiped out. It was literally wiped out by a tsunami. And some people believed that it could have been at least the influence for the myth.
Okay, let me challenge that by another myth. So what is probably the third biggest myth in the world? It is the flood myth. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we see flood myths all across the Near East. And we see the flood myths particularly because of, the Persian Gulf So to which the Euphrates and Tigris flow into, the key rivers of Mesopotamia, where civilization really started. That Persian Gulf 15,000 years ago wasn't there. Okay, that sea has been created in the last 15,000 years. That would have created some stories, I tell you, because it's right on the cusp of where civilization sort of began. So you're getting these stories, but they're not remembering the story of Atlantis there. Does that seem odd? You know, for it's that long ago, you know, this is happening over 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, according to Plato, based on Hancock's calculations. It does seem odd that the flood myth continues, but there's no detailed myth of Atlantis. It just doesn't make sense. They wouldn't keep other myths going and not Atlantis if it was that key. As I say, there is just no record anywhere of it. And you know, it ends up back in Greece for Plato, which he says he gets from Egypt. And there are other myths that would have been better told, and there would have been other flood myths like that. And you know, there are plenty of flood myths from Noah and Gilgamesh and the like. We see them all. Mm-hmm. They would be more likely to be told, because if things were getting wiped out, people would remember that, and they do in the flood myths. So no flood myth talks about Atlantis.
Okay. All right. Do you know if there could have been, like, it could have been derived, like Plato could have derived this from other flood myths at the time and just made a story that he made money off of? Or?
Yeah, well, there were flood myths in Greece. They're very similar to Noah's Ark. So yes, the flood myth, as I say, is the third most popular myth type after death and creation. So no doubt there were flood myths, and no doubt he could. You know, he was a great storyteller. He was a writer. He would have heard these myths. I mean, everybody had learnt Homer and alike. So when things are written, they tend to copy those myths. I mean, that's why the New Testament of the Bible is pretty much copies of Greek stories, because the writers were Greek and they learnt their Greek, you know, learning Greek classic writers. And that's why you can see lots of analogies in the New Testament to Greek stories, in case you weren't aware of that. So equally, Plato would have learned Greek in a similar way, studied the classics, realised there were flood myths, and tweaked the flood myths. So rather than the flood wiping out the world, he's made the flood wipe out a city that, you know, was an amazing city. As I say, he said that's what it is, a story.
All right. And were there other things that Plato just told that were just stories as well?
Analogies. He's told a number of analogies. I mean, but he also concentrated on politics and things like with the Republic and that, which is still very useful at the time. And it was because we believe he was interested in politics and culture that myth of Atlantis is analogous to how Greece used to be a better culture with better politics than it was today. And that's why we think it was his way of saying he is disappointed with Greece at the moment, because he couldn't actually say that out loud, because if he did, he would get lynched. So,
over his opinion.
Yeah, exactly, because that's how the government worked at the time. So it was easy to write a story suggesting it, because it's just a story.
Here's my passive aggressive criticism.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Excellent. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we...
On Atlantis, no. I mean, it's all fairly straightforward. You can read Plato's work. You can read, I think it's in history. So Herodotus' histories, where he talks about Solon going to Egypt. So even Solon didn't, I don't know if Solon actually wrote about it. So you have to go to Herodotus, who said that Solon went to Egypt to get Plato, quoting Herodotus, to say Solon went to Egypt. So people read Herodotus' histories. It's in there somewhere. If people want to, understand it. But yes, as I said earlier, Graham Hancock's great at getting facts. So he's taken facts from Herodotus' histories, real quotes and things, and then he's weaved this fantastic mythology that sounds like it fits, but actually it does fall apart really easily if you just know what to look for.
Okay. All right. And did Solon ever write anything down? Is there anything?
I I'm not familiar with his work, so I don't know. I'm not. I mean, he must have written stuff down because he's known in Greek history. So whether we have records of it, I'm not sure because it is quite old. So it is sort of sixth century, I believe. So I don't think we had too much writing going back that time. So I'm not sure. A quick check on Wikipedia would find out.
All right. It'll have to, if there is, then that'll have to probably be my second installment of learning more about Atlantis.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, even if Solon did it, he wouldn't have written anything about it because Hancock doesn't quote Solon as saying that. He has to quote Herodotus, who then says Solon, basically Herodotus says Solon traveled around the world, and one of his trips was to Egypt, and he visited the temple. And then Solon talks about, Herodotus talks about Solon doing many other things in far more detail. So again, if Atlantis was such a significant thing, why did Herodotus not discuss it in his histories? Why did he discuss other things that are far less interesting?
Okay. Yeah.
He discusses how Egyptians care for animals, for example, and have a love for animals, rather than, this advanced civilization.
Maybe animals are just more interesting than advanced civilization.
Who knows? It's unlikely, isn't it? So,
I mean, we still have YouTube channels, social media pages, and TV channels devoted to animals. I mean,
but it likes the cat. I mean, the Greeks were getting into cats at that point. So yes, maybe.
I'm just being an ass at this point.
No, that's fine. No, but it's a good point. But I don't think Herodotus was an animal lover because, as I say, he was shocked at how Egyptians cared for their animals because it was very different to Greece because they mummified and had deities for different animals, and when they died, they would take them to particular temples around Egypt. So I guess they were surprised at that, but doesn't mention much about Solon at all, which makes you think, how do people know Solon actually found that? And they have to go to Plato to say he found it, but we don't know where Plato's source is. So again, it is, there isn't significant evidence. There's a lot of assumption there.
So there's a lot of assumption. All right. And so as an academic, like if you wanted to go ahead and provide an argument for or against Atlantis, like for people that are not academics like myself, I'm just an entertainer. What would be like a process to, be getting, into doing, like, to piece this together? At least is just kind of an elevator.
Source information. You go to the source information. So where does your information come from? So i.e., you don't get 20 books from the bookshop on Atlantis or from Amazon or wherever, because they're all written by people who've read books, and the people writing about Atlantis who's read books, those books they've read are probably written by people who've read other books about Atlantis. So there's lots of books of Atlantis, but actually, if you go, where did they all get their information from? It all boils down to literally one line in Herodotus's histories, one line, and a couple of pages in Plato. That's it. So read that, get Plato, get Herodotus, look at that information, and then work out, work out how they could fit together. So what we do, so the work I do about mythology and tracing mythology, we use something called phylogenetics. So which is basically probabilistically determining the likely origin of a myth. Okay, and what we do is because we understand how people move around the world, and we understand DNA and archaeology, and we understand what the myth story is, and we can understand key words and phrases in the myth, we can map the probability of a myth changing over time. If there's a similar, if somewhere else, we can see what the chance went there. And so if we basically say, this is all the variants of the myth, and this is how people move around, let's look at every place on the world and see the likelihood of the myth coming from there. One place will pop up as a high probability of this myth source. So that's sort of how we do it. So for Atlantis, we don't even have enough information to even run that analysis. So we can't even, the probability of Atlantis existing is naught, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. All right. That's yeah. All right. I think enough said right there.
Okay.
All right. So thank you again, Jon, for coming back on and talking about Atlantis.
Please be here. Thanks, Gary.